Hello, and thank you for listening again. This is the new presidency with the LaRouche slate of candidates. I'm Keisha Rogers, LaRouche candidate in Texas 22nd District, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. For those of you who have been listening to these podcasts, it is very important that you're listening to this one because the material that we're going to lay out in this discussion will define the only option for survival. So make sure you listen very carefully because what we're going to say will save your life. We have now come to the end of the system. The entire transatlantic system is bankrupt, and we can witness a complete collapse of the system any day now. The entire Eurozone is bankrupt. The only chance for survival is to reject the tolerance of a system of monetarism and free trade policies that have gotten us into this mess that has been the paradigm for the last 40 years plus of physical economic decline and breakdown since the assassination of President Kennedy and his brother Bobby. Now, if we want to reverse this trend and return to the true principles of our nation of productive economy and the productive powers of labor based on the principles of the human mind, real economy, the things that we used to do. We used to build things. We used to be the greatest power in the world. We used to be looked up to other nations. The only remedy to reversing this paradigm shift and this trend that we've seen since the assassination of President Kennedy is going to require immediate steps of action that have been laid out by our slate of candidates and by economist Lyndon LaRouche. And you can find many of these steps if you go back and look at what he laid out in September of 2011 as the seven necessary steps for survival. In those seven necessary steps, the primary steps were, first and foremost, get Obama out of office. We're going to do that with the 25th Amendment, Section 4 of our U.S. Constitution, or impeachment. Secondly, we have to go with a national credit system modeled on the principles of Alexander Hamilton. And furthermore, we need investment into long-term infrastructure projects that will put our nation back to work in productive jobs and give the nation a mission. So with what we're seeing right now, with the continued insanity being pushed by this Obama administration, the drive toward thermonuclear World War III, and the policy of a breakdown crisis of the entire transatlantic system, as we will make clear, the only option for our survival at this present moment and the survival of mankind in general is to get Obama out of office and stop his drive that we're currently seeing toward thermonuclear World War III. What I'd like to do first and foremost is to get the discussion going with the slate here by having Rachel give us a more in-depth picture of what's going on across the country and what's going on in terms of the political situation and what we're facing at this present moment. So Rachel, how are you?
Hi, thanks Keisha. Well, like you started off with, we are at a complete point of disaster. And whether it's going to be a drive for World War III or whether it would be a disintegration into economic collapse where you can't support the population and you have a dictatorship under Obama's policies, such as his recent National Defense Authorization Act, where we are in a complete collapse. And the policies we'll be discussing today in this discussion are the most important thing, that people realize that what's been done to them, the fact that they can't afford to live, to eat, and that they're being thrown away onto the trash heap of society under Obama, that these policies have to be reversed now. And so the recent developments are I'd say, one, around the LaRouche PAC intervention into World War III and pointing out the fact that the British Empire were intending to create a world war, not a regional conflict, and not a humanitarian intervention in Iran and Syria. You know, that what we did with our mobilizing, as discussed in our podcast of last week, was effective. For one, the fact that out of Syria right now, the opposition groups just signed an agreement saying they said 3 no's. No to no use of violence against the Assad government, no fomenting of sectarian conflicts, and no for foreign interventions. So that's a definite stop, a halt to this process. Then we also have the process of collapse of the Eurozone continuing and hyperinflation. The ECB recently printed this record amount of 500 billion euros, which was parked in the banks. There's frozen interbank lending in the European system, and there's reports of secret printing of national currencies all around Europe. There was just a poll out in Germany which said that 72% of Germans still calculate, they translate the euro to the Deutschmark when they're shopping and things like this. So you get a sense that we can disintegrate the Eurozone system and go back to this system, back to a system of national currencies if we get rid of Obama in the United States and we get Glass-Steagall through, which is the only way. So we have a continued hyperinflationary meltdown, and then you also have this National Defense Authorization Act, which was just signed. While people were hanging out with their friends and family over New Year's, Obama was signing into law a fascist bill, the National Defense Authorization Act, which deprives Americans of habeas corpus. It says that regular American citizens could essentially be characterized as terrorists and deprived of their constitutional protections of a right to trial. So if they do such things as criticize the government or protest, which any sane American is doing right now. It is a dictatorship unless we get Obama out. And there has been criticism of this policy, including Russia Times, said Obama has campaigned against what Bush did with torture and war, and now he's doing it. You have a GW law professor speaking out against it. David Swanson, some people from both sides of the aisle are saying things like, well, this is what we overthrew the King George III for, is exactly what Obama is doing. So you have opposition building to this, but it's not saying what we're saying, which is that one, this is driven by the financial collapse. They're not discussing this. And two, they're not discussing the fact that it's not Obama, that this is the British Empire. And this is very important for people to distinguish between, is the difference, as Dave Christie pointed out in a recent statement, the difference between Obama and the British Empire, which is a much bigger, longer-lasting force, which is the true enemy that we have to annihilate.
Yeah, that's very important. That what you just laid out here should contrast in the minds of the population. It should stick starkly in the minds of the population what we're up against. And what we are going to discuss today is the policy for what defines a real productive economy, what defines the principles of our nation by how we used to organize our system around a real mission for the future. And part of that starts with how we organize our society around looking at the production of society based on the advancements of the creative powers of the human mind. And this is what our first Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, understood. Alexander Hamilton defining the principles of a credit system, also, and what our Article 1, Section 8 of our U.S. Constitution represents is the principle of Hamilton's notion of a credit system. Hamilton took this idea of a credit system and expanded it toward his understanding of a national bank and how you commit to investing in the long-term productivity of society?
Well, I think, as Lynn outlined in the 7 steps to recovery here, number 1 is the ouster of Obama and Glass-Steagall as a single step, and that we're not going to survive unless we get Glass-Steagall in and free us from, as Summer pointed out in his statement that he's going to be issuing around his getting petitions for his campaign, that we have, it's now coming out that we're $29 trillion into this bailout. $29 trillion. So that can never be paid. There is not enough economic activity to pay that off. And so once we get Glass-Steagall in, we're going to give that all back to Wall Street. They can have it back. It's their garbage. We're not responsible for paying off their garbage, debts. But at that point, what we're going to find is that under Glass-Steagall standards, we don't have enough real money, so-called. That's in the sense of financial obligations that are tied to real physical assets or production, right? So at that point, we're going to have to put new credit into the system. And I would just like to refer to quickly to LaRouche's September 30th statement, where he discusses that what you're dealing with credit is not about the banknotes and the cash and the forms of how we keep track of it. It's rather what is the process of the spanning of generations, because the kind of projects that we're going to have to, that will be the basis for the new credit to be put into the system, like NWAPA, like our space program, that these kind of projects are often going to span many generations and go through different lives, which is why you can't rely on just single investors who might be putting money into a project but may not actually see the returns in their lifetime. So, but he goes into this idea that it's what transcends your life after your death. He says that human life is not simply a process of replacement, of one life replacing another, but that you actually have to it's a process of development, in the sense that each generation draws down an existing resource base based on their technology, and therefore the next generation has to improve in terms of its overall energy flux density, which means that's a process of development. And therefore, the key in creating this process of development, that unit should be the credit. So it's idea that we invest into the kind of scientific improvements in technology and so on that give us those margins of increase of our ability to utilize a previously unexisting resource base or use it more efficiently, depending on where you're at. But you're going into this idea of process of development, and that's the real foundation of credit, and it becomes a concept of history.
No, I just wanted to add on this Hamilton question, because what you're saying is really, really important, and what you had brought up before in your specialty of smashing the greens. This is a really big deal, because first of all, Hamilton grew up in the Caribbean, so we got to see the British Empire policy firsthand in terms of slavery, the sugar trade, how totally brutal and barbaric, and also entropic, because if you're only relying, in a sense, on the sense certainty, physical labor of human beings as if we're animals, that's a dead end. It leads to a dark age. And I don't know if there's anyone, of course, other than LaRouche now, but in terms of our founding fathers, Hamilton was so clear, for example, in his paper on the subject of manufacturers, because there was a big debate, isn't agriculture more important than manufacturing? Isn't it true that you can multiply the amount of production per acre by investing in the land and fertilizer, crop rotation, all different things? And, of course, yes, you can increase food production geometrically, contrary to Thomas Malthus and other lunatics. But what Hamilton really understood was this question of multiplying the objects of the human mind, that the point of a science-driven economy is that you're broadening the base of knowledge and you're creating a potential for more and more people to be involved creatively. So it requires a greater division of labor so that it actually is the case that not only is population growth good, but it's necessary to have a scientifically advanced economy. And I think this is something that really people don't get. They just don't understand it. They think you have to conserve, you have to get smaller, that less is more, that the way you have more is you cut it off from someone else. And these views are so anti-American.
Just to make a point on what you were saying there, one of the other things that Lynn brings up is that the content of a credit system is not the cash, it's not the banknotes, it's not the formal things. He says the content is the creativity. That's what gives you these margins of increase. And I think that's important for our friends here who adhere to the Ron Paul and the so-called Austrian school, and they say, oh, we understand you about the worthlessness of money. Now, that's why we're big advocates of gold. And this is just the same kind of absolute lunacy. I know that actually that was one of the things that came up around Lincoln's greenback policy, where the banks were trying to get the Treasury to put their gold in them to use it as a form of speculation. But I know Keisha had done some looking a little bit into the greenback, which is really an outgrowth of what Hamilton had done.
Yeah, just briefly, one thing that just in terms of what you were just bringing up about what has been adopted in the society, this goes back to this, adopted intolerance of a system of monetarism versus what real economy based on physical production. This is what you have a society that says that, income is just income. However you make the money is how you make the money. I just need to know how I'm going to make the money, whether it's, producing something physically productive for society or not. Don't say there's no jobs out there because you can just go out there and work at McDonald's. That's how people who think about money in terms of just, I just need to have paper, pieces of paper that's going to buy something versus like what is the value of this currency? How do you take this idea of this so-called currency and give it actual value based on what's being produced in your society? And this is only understood through the increases in the principles of the productive powers of labor, which is the increase in the productive powers in human creativity, your society actually producing physical goods that will actually sustain the population growth of society and even increase the population growth of society. And this is something that, if you think about with Franklin Roosevelt in his policies, and even in his policies for, development plans such as the Tennessee Valley Authority, everything that in terms of our productive capabilities that got us through the production of World War II, but then also, even going back to Lincoln and his transcontinental railway system, because, he was a major opponent of this system of monetarism. And if it hadn't been for Lincoln's greenback policy and what he did to refute this whole system of currency in the way that the British imperial system was initiating it, and to use the greenback in the way that Hamilton did in initiating, that the debt of society was actually going to be used for creating the credit of society to get the nation back on the track toward real physical production. A couple of the things that Lincoln was able to accomplish, and just interesting to note, in the December 3rd of 1861, in his annual address to Congress, he laid out key emergency measures, which included things such as investment into national investment into nationally regulated private banking system, which would increase, which would issue credit for building industry. We had the credit for industry. We had the policies of our greenbacks. I think it was like something like 430 million. I can't remember the exact amount of greenbacks that were used, produced almost 300% of the national credit for being able to organize the Civil War, to fund the Union, to fund the Civil War. And if Lincoln hadn't produced this type of credit, these greenbacks, then we probably wouldn't have been able to get through the Civil War. You had, programs such as 5% interest at 20-year rates of low-interest bonds that would be organized, that we issued general public and to nationally chartered banks. Obviously, you had this with a big product of of Lincoln's transcontinental railway system. So these are just some of the things in terms of how you take this question of what you put into the production of society in terms of investment into long-term, 25, 50-year long-term infrastructure projects and development plans, and how that's going to basically give back to society more productive powers to your society by organizing your credit systems in the way that you're going to make your society more productive. I mean, obviously, this was the policy of President Kennedy with President Roosevelt, President Kennedy, and the moon mission, the space mission. For every bit of development in space exploration, we would get so much back in return for physical production, economic production in your economy. So that's what we're looking at. We're not looking at, trying to peg some amount of, gold to the dollar or anything like that. It's a question of the value of your currency based on some type of real physical production through human beings.
Just real quick, I just have one quick quote from Lincoln where he says this idea that it's not the money or the gold or whatever, people get obsessed with the things and the stuff, but what he says here I think is very to the point. He says, labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor and could never have existed if labor had not first existed. Labor is the superior of capital and deserves the much higher consideration. He goes on with more on that point, that labor is prior to, in the sense of, and then of course labor coming from creativity, but prior to the capital. The capital is the fruit of the labor.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful.
Right.
I think one of the things that I think you were just bringing up, Keisha, not just that you've got labor in and of itself, but what is the quality of labor that is being undertaken by your economy, by your citizens, developing the creative mental powers of your citizens as an ongoing process. And I think it's interesting because you get these different phases of the credit system, and then you kind of have advancements in the credit system. And I think that with Franklin Roosevelt, the kind of advancements we saw in science, his presidency coincided with some of the greatest minds in science. You had the Einstein, Planck, Vladimir Vernadsky in Russia, and then you had probably the first time that you ever had a president appoint some sort of scientific advisor, Vannevar Bush, who was advising Roosevelt on some sort of policy for never-ending progress. Where were the new breakthroughs going to come from? The first time you had a regular funding of scientific research as a fundamental part of the federal budget of the United States. And this is not just to make the point that what we do in the United States and what we've always done that's been successful is we've literally driven at the frontiers of science and industry in order to make the kind of breakthroughs that were required that went straight into upgrading the living standards of all American citizens. And so the problem that tends to come up with people who talk about economics is they do try to say that employment is equal to income, and that's not true. It's actually what is the quality of employment that's being undertaken by the individual in your society, and then also the advancement of that individual, their ability to advance, their capability to produce. That's what's actually primary. And we've lost that sense. And the problem with some young guy who just says, let me make money any old way I want to, or some baby boomer who says, let me just make money. Money, if I have money, money makes the world go round, is that they're missing the fundamental principle of what it actually means to be human and to be creative and figure out discoveries and breakthroughs that open up new doors for humanity. And then those breakthroughs open up several new doors. So the more you come to know, the more you're trying to figure out about the way the world works, the way the solar system works, and the way the galaxy works. And then we're figuring out more and more about the universe itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just to add to that point, I think, this is where the completely individualistic idea of what creates wealth in a society, you see where the problem comes up with individuals like Ron Paul, or people who just have a sort of idea that's just sort of the individual desiring to make a living, which is going to drive things, or even a kind of variation on that, which you get in these trade union sectors, which is that, well, if we just get people working at a decent wage, then they'll spend money, and that money will sort of circulate, and it'll continually circulate, and people just will have jobs by virtue of the fact that there's sort of a broader base that's getting, a better income. But it still is a monetarist idea. Whereas the real issue is actually a scientific one. It's a physical scientific issue, which is sort of twofold. You can think about it as twofold, which is that since Kennedy's death, we've had a deficit in the sense that we've increased the population, and we've have not kept up with the type of technological advancements that are necessary, due to the fact that we are sort of even at a fixed technological level, you're going to draw down the resources. And so already any idea of sort of treading water or breaking even actually is a collapse. So we have a deficit in terms of the fact that we haven't increased the physical productivity. In fact, we've deindustrialized. But then we've also got another deficit, which is a cultural deficit, which is that you've got an entire generation which missed out on the opportunity to be involved in the type of process which is required to have a productive culture again. And I bring this up because immediately when we implement Glass-Steagall, we're facing the challenge of, like was said, if we stop this war drive, get Obama out, implement Glass-Steagall, one, there's not a lot of private money in the system, and you've got to also deal with the fact that there's not enough food. You have people who are going to have to be taken care of in terms of Social Security and so forth. There's going to be increased demands just to keep certain people alive. But at the same time, the credit that's going to be issued has to create the most productive effect. It's got to be the capital-intensive investments which are going to generate dramatic transformations. And so one of the real questions that comes up is that you've got a young generation that is not actually really inclined to think in terms of being productive, because they just think in terms of, I need a job so I can survive. But from the standpoint of how the whole society is going to survive, that won't work. So I think that's where the issue of the mission orientation, if you have a mission for man, and this comes back to the idea of a credit system as being over several generations, if you have an idea of what the virtue is of the work that someone's going to be doing as a young person developing a skill, then there's a certain actual incentive for them to be part of a process in which they can see that they're actually part of creating a future for humanity, which has a value just beyond that, the paycheck per se.
To throw in a point on what you were just saying, I think this capital-intensive productive jobs is important to make clear is not green jobs. Green jobs mean death. Green jobs means a decrease in backwardness in the production of society, to actually take society backwards. So that needs to be made clear, and I was just thinking about that because we actually had I went to a event where they had a manufacturing, let's bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States, and the way that they were promoting this were not these large capital-intensive, productive, developed jobs, but were, let's make it friendly, environmental friendly to everyone. Let's have green jobs where everyone will get excited and you don't have to go and get dirty with industrial jobs and various things like that. So, this is just completely insane. And they had about 50 people. This is the labor unions, that actually built for our nation, the AFL-CIO type unions. And you have them talking about going away from these types of productive jobs and, we got to go with environmentalist friendly. So it's completely insane. So I think it's just very clear that if we don't cut this crap out about going with a green policy, we're talking about capitulating to the British plan for population reduction, for the reduction of these types of capital-intensive productive jobs that we have known in our society. So that's just a point I just want to make there.
What I wanted to add on that is that green is genocide, and it is this Obama policy of throwing people on the scrap heap. I'm here visiting Bill in Detroit, and we were out today at a post office, and it is very striking how many people of the age maybe 55 plus are unemployed. A lot of these are highly skilled workers. They got bought out. They took the package. They shut down the plant. And these people are not valued. So on the one hand, you have this kind of despair where we have record levels of crime. Everyone's heard of crimes where people go in and kill all their children and then commit suicide, and just total horror. On the other hand, if we were going to organize a recovery based along the lines of what LaRouche has been saying, this is an extraordinary resource that we still have this layer in the population of highly skilled individuals who are not going to be out digging ditches. You don't want to use them for manual labor. But we have incredible strength of mind of people in their 60s and 70s who could be brought back in, and if we needed to organize, if we actually thought we were going to organize a recovery, we were going to revive NASA, we were going to develop the Arctic, we're going to colonize Mars, this is our greatest resource, is this generation, to bring them in and get them hands-on designing what's required, but also training a whole younger generation because, of course, no one even teaches the sciences anymore. I remember one of the nuclear engineers that was interviewed on our website around the NWAP, and he said, oh, no, they don't have nuclear engineering anymore because no one does hands-on work in that field. We only have nuclear science. So you just get a sense of the mentality of Obama, of his health care plan. If you're over 45, why should you be treated? We'll just put you on a morphine drip and let you drop dead. It's such a hateful, satanic view of the nature of man and also the value of a huge generation, particularly which we have in this part of the country, in this whole arsenal of democracy area. It's just very, very striking.
On that, what you're saying, Diane, I think it's just to drive the point home. We're looking at, just from what we talked about here, $29 trillion bailout of the financial system, and this is now public. We have a $500 billion of the Euro system that just occurred. And, I was just reading the reports on what's going on in Greece right now as a result of the austerity policy. They're They're canceling in the healthcare sector smallpox vaccines. They're canceling in the healthcare sector other vaccines. HIV rates are going up. There's a collapse in I read an article about a woman who can't even get insulin for her child who's diabetic, and she had to go and beg in front of an office that sold the insulin medication, and somebody felt sorry for her and gave her medication for another 2 weeks. But what you're seeing is a societal breakdown, and you're seeing it's not genocide that's coming. It's genocide that's already happening. We're seeing it, and you're seeing it, as you brought up with the Obama health care, the cuts to Medicare, the cuts to health care, the denial of people of prescription medication, and then in the Orwellian line that this is universal health care. And it's a lie, and it's a push to have genocide right now. And we've seen it for years now, decades. You've seen it what's going on in Africa. You've seen the reduction in the living standards, the reemergence of diseases that we thought we had wiped out the face of the planet coming back. You've got the condition now of war being pushed by the exact same financial British Empire to just blow up the whole region. And as we've said here over and over again, the green stated view is that you can only fit 1 to 2 billion people on the face of the planet. They're pushing an agenda, and you just have to put two and two together and realize that this is a depopulation policy that's now in motion. And the policy that we're proposing is such a clear perspective on how to get out of this thing in the short term. And getting Obama out is life or death. If you want to play basketball with him, go play basketball with him. But he's not going to be your president. And I think the only real question is whether or not Obama can play basketball in a straitjacket. I'd like to see that.
I don't think so. We should try it out for size and get him one. The population should join us in that. But I think one of the things that the population and the people who are listening to this should know is, these policies and what we're discussing here is already ready to be implemented. As you said just now, Summer, the only thing we need is to get Obama out with the 25th Amendment and get the straitjacket ready. And once we do that and we stop this drive toward thermonuclear World War III, then the doors are wide open in terms of what we can start producing with the initiation of Glass-Steagall and the initiation of a credit system, as we've been discussing here. And I know that that's been beautifully laid out, that plan, in terms of the work that our basement team, our science team, is doing on the development of, actually discussing the development of the Arctic Circle as defined by an extended NWAPA. And we've gone through a lot on this question of the North American Water and Power Alliance. But I think what we're seeing right now in terms of the alternative that's coming out of Russia and taking up and defining the types of development plans and policies that the United States, if we had a sane president and if we had a sane administration, sane policy, could be collaborating with Russia on in terms of this Arctic development plan. And that's something that I think we should, go through just a little bit here, but most definitely it's something that people have to get a clear understanding of as the initiative that we should be taking.
This is a paper by Sky Shields and Michelle Fuchs on the whole question of the Arctic development. And, I think just to make a quick point on it, like what you have going on with the Russians, where their plans for building this 5,000-person, city or whatever you want to call it, where they'll be able to live above the Arctic Circle in very harsh conditions in a totally self-contained, system there, which is, modeled on aspects of the International Space Station. And that what you actually get into the question of the Arctic development, for us to do NWAPA, which is absolutely crucial, again, to go back to this idea that what we were talking about with the credit system is where we don't have enough of the real money left after the Glass-Steagall, which means we're going to have to put new credit in, but that's got to be backed up by something that will function, which is what NWAPA represents. And so once we get up there with the rail lines and the construction and so on, we're going to have certain habitation like this. But what you actually begin to realize is that these kind of structures give us really, it's more oriented towards the space program, which is the other side of this, is that we are preparing with these projects and with this concept of credit, we are preparing the capability for mankind to exist off of this planet and to be a truly immortal species, because this is going to, the sun will supernova or whatever it's going to do. We are not going to be on this planet forever, so we have to start thinking off into the future that way. So I think that's one aspect of the Arctic development question. I don't know if people have other things to add, but
yeah, Dave, one thing I found interesting actually was that if you look at one thing that came up in this paper was that you have these lava tunnels on the moon, and if you were going to be able to protect yourself on the moon once we got there, you would need to construct some sort of structure inside of these lava tunnels where the temperature would actually be about something like negative 30 degrees Celsius, which is the average temperature that the Russians are going to be facing when they build this city in the Arctic. And so it'll be a clear test case scenario for us embarking on our first fully habitable living area on the moon itself. And I think what's interesting is the more you look at all of these things, what we're trying to do with our policy, and you see what mankind really is, you see that there's a certain thing about the universe that's made it very opportune for us to try and do everything we're talking about. There's a mass of helium-3 on the moon for fusion reactions. The gravity is much lower on the moon, and so it's easier to launch regular missions it's easier to launch regular missions from the moon than from Earth itself. And you just have everything sitting here for us to conquer and figure all this stuff out, and things have been put in such an order just right around us in such a way that we can have this kind of immortal, constant mission, never-ending progress approach.
Yeah, that's the beauty of what people can be participating in, what actually gives meaning to our lives. I mean, if the population would stand up on their hind legs and fight with the type of courage that's required to say no more of this, we're going to remove this president immediately. We're not waiting for some opportune time at some election, because first of all, as we reported earlier here, what we've just created, what the Republicans and Democrats have voted on, have actually allowed to happen, is that we've given Obama dictatorial powers by passing this National Defense Authorization Act. And now every single principle of our rights and Declaration of Independence has been destroyed by people capitulating to this president and to the policies of this empire to go for destruction, to go for thermonuclear World War III and population reduction. So I think that what we've laid out here in this discussion should really define a clear direction for the nation. It's already ready to be implemented. People just have to make the right decision to fight with us and to ensure that we can actually drive the nation toward a direction of a future for mankind with these types of beautiful ideas that we can be fighting for. And, you look back in history and you can look at great leaders such as President Kennedy and Franklin Roosevelt and President Lincoln, and everything that they represented as a fight against this British imperial policy of that has sought to destroy the creative and productive powers of society. And this is the type of discussion that we need to be having in these political debates. Instead of talking about who's big and bad, who can blow up Iran, who's not talking about blowing up Iran enough. This is just ludicrous. It's complete insanity. And so I think that serious patriots, regardless, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green, whatever you are, that your mission at this present moment has to be to immediately understand these policies that we're laying out and here today, and to move to implement them immediately. Because as we said here, this is your only chance for survival, and there's no other option. So with that, I'd like to thank people, and we will have more discussion on the next podcast. Thanks.